Do you see now the difference in our power?
Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today I want to talk about something different. God of War. They showed off the new one, the next one. It's kind of a spin-off in a way, but it's also kind of a continuation. It's covering Kratos' wife, Faye, and it's covering her journey through the afterlife, where she journeys through every win. It's basically the world where gods go when they die. So there's a continuation there where we thought it was some kind of permanent death. That's what really Odin was fearing, but when the gods die, they go to everyone. And in there, it's basically chaos. You have this really like powerful magic that is just there. We don't know if some kind of entity put that magic there, or if this is just what happens with so many godlike beings get together. They can try to like create some kind of magic. We'll have to find the source of that. But the concept of this is really interesting because you have multiple different dead gods from pantheons existing here. What that pretty much means is that the whole entire pantheon of Olympus, Greek mythology, will be there. And I am interested to see how they will react, how they will feel when they learn that Kratos' wife is there. Even though she wasn't with him when he was doing those things, they hate his guts. They brought down his whole pantheon and they sent him there. And ever since then, those guys have been fighting in this ruthless, like, underworld of God Battle Royale. And they will blame her for that. They will blame Kratos for that. And they will want revenge. So that's going to be very interesting to see how those characters have progressed, which ones show up. Poseidon, Zeus, Hades, so many different characters to pick from throughout Kratos' long line of chaos. But another thing that I want to focus on is the new type of gods we'll see. Of course, they showed us two. They showed us the god from Mongolia, and they also showed us the god from Buddhist. Both of those gods are kind of like a god of war type character from their pantheons, and seeing that they're joining forces and seeing how hostile they are to newcomers is kind of cool, but also it's kind of funny as well because they were very angry at her for showing up, but it's not like she showed up to a party unannounced. She died and was in the underworld. So you think that they would be a little bit more accepting to like people showing up, and they would try to recruit them, but maybe they have some like troubled history there where they try to accept like some trickster god or some smarter god, some powerful god, and they were backstabbed. So this seems like a world where it's very hostile, and it doesn't seem like a place where death is the solution, because they were even kind of playing around with this idea like, I'm not afraid of death. Dying here is very difficult. And in the blog post that PlayStation posted, it kept talking about getting captured in prison. That seems to be the way that these gods contain each other, is by imprisoning each other with powerful magic and kind of taking them out that way. I am interested to see how big this world is. Is it ever expanding? Because if it's ever expanding, then why would you need to fight over land? So it must be some kind of containment that's placed on these guys for them to want to rival and feud with one another over resources, land, something that is driving this conflict. But then I'm also interested to see what her journey is through this game, because they're toying around with the idea of her getting back to Kratos and saving Kratos. And what is that about, right? We saw their full journey, Kratos kind of going on this redemption arc, causing Ragnarok, but in a good way, and saving the Norse pantheon and kind of replacing Odin and becoming loved. So how will she have affected that role, and will she actually make it back to the world of the living? Because they kind of tease that the gate is closed, and if there was some way to open that gate, would all of the gods then be able to go back out into the world? Because that is pretty interesting, because if that is what they're alluding to, it would mean that death is not something that could contain the gods. When they died previously, it was a very impactful thing, and it was like they are gone. But if there is a way for at least Faye to make it back, that means that someone else can possibly replicate it. And if that's the case, everyone could more or less figure it out. It could be exploited. And then death will no longer be a factor to the gods. And that would kind of defeat the purpose of them like living and dying and all of that. So I'm interested to see how that story plays out, because when you're dealing with something like this, it could very easily go astray and make a lot of things not matter, retcons, plot holes, contrived stories, etc. But talking generally about some of the things that we've seen in it, like for example, the set pieces, the visual flair of the characters, to see the way that all of these characters are moving, the way that they look visually, it's immaculate. This is definitely like a next gen type of game. When you said PlayStation 5, this is what I think, right? Even if you look at the fight scenes and how it's so dynamic, where they're going up in the air, they're flying into walls and boulders, and they're chasing each other down. There's so many set pieces that's moving around in the background, and it kind of feels like more than a game. A lot of times when you're watching a fight scene or a cutscene, it's very stagnant, and the environment doesn't really change that much. But now we're starting to see the next evolution, especially with God of War, but in gaming in general, where the backgrounds are starting to become more dynamic, and you can see the processing power of these consoles and the PCs really be tapped into. I also know that for this time around, Corey Barlog will not be the one who's directing it. He is now the creative head, so he's overseeing everything God of War related. And this time they have a new director. Now, this person has worked on the game since God of War 1, so they have a long history with the game. And I know there's a lot of people on Twitter who's like questioning why she's there. Conversations of DEI, and it's kind of a mess on Twitter, as you would assume. But you got to see what the person's capable of, right? What they showed in the little highlight thing, I was hyped about it. It felt God of War to me, and I think it makes so much sense in terms of the story, because they already kind of hinted at this idea of like what happens after death. Even with Kratos in God of War 3 stabbed himself with I can't think of the sword name, the big blue sword. When he stabbed himself with that, it was kind of this like crazy moment. Like, is he dead? Is he still alive? And they showed the trail of blood leading to the ledge. And then, he ends up in North Realm. And then it's just like this whole thing about life and death all throughout the God of War franchise. And I feel like them finally getting to the point where they answer the question of what happens next. I personally feel like this is a full circle moment, and I hope they do it justice. So far, what I've seen, I'm excited. Usually when you get answers to the big question, it's kind of underwhelming, but just the idea of seeing all of these different pantheons coexisting, fighting one another and battling one another, and how their pantheons blend in the afterlife, that's really cool, because we think of it as separate, right? Kratos was an invader to the North realm, and that was a very big deal. But now we can see how all of that kind of is discarded in the afterlife, and they form new alliances. Like, if you go back and talk about Zeus, right? Some of those guys may not want to work with him. They may feel like he led them astray, he betrayed them, he did this, he did that. There could be a lot of things that transpired here to make people feel a type of way. And honestly, I want to see how the power levels decrease, because the Greek mythology figures, those guys were able to do some crazy thing, create big statues, summon the whole ocean, rule the entire underworld. It seems like the Norse mythology gods were weaker than Greek. And just looking at the two that we've seen in the new footage that they showed off, I mean, I would have to say that Zeus and his team look like stronger than all of them. But we'll have to see how that pans out, and we'll have to see how the power levels stack up. One thing I'm also interested in, how and if they will address the differences in the Roman pantheon and Greek pantheon, because it's really the same gods, it's just different names, but the names and the differences are very big, and I would like to see how that's addressed. Pantheons from different timelines, if that's all intertwined, and if this is like, because it's called every win, so if it's called every win, it implies time when you use the word win. So every pantheon, when they existed here in this place, is kind of what the name can lead to. So I just wonder how much stuff will we get from the future, past, and present, and pretty much who will they confirm is dead gods in the God of War mythology. And the last thing I'll wonder is whether or not Kratos and Atreus, aka Loki, will show up at the end, in the middle. Will there be some kind of reuniting with these characters somewhere along the journey, because her journey is getting back to Kratos, and we played through the story and we know that she does not appear at any point in time from what we can tell. So will this kind of cover the entirety of the God of War Norse mythology, and she shows up at the end with an extra piece of information? Or will that be saved for a part 2? All in all, I'm very excited.